Sign this prenup, or you'll ruin his future. The icy demand echoes in a Chicago mansion where a radiant black elementary school teacher faces a document meant to strip her dignity. Her modest paycheck, South Side roots, and skin color mark her as an outsider in her fiancé's wealthy, white world. She endures veiled insults, her noble profession mocked as quaint, her background dismissed as lesser, her love branded a threat. Yet, a hidden truth waits to shatter their assumptions, a secret that could redefine her worth. Will love prevail, or will prejudice tear it apart? Subscribe to our channel for the latest gripping stories and share in the comments where you're tuning in from. Can she rise above their judgment? What legacy lies buried in her past? Stay with us to uncover a journey of resilience and empowerment that will leave you inspired. The rain tapped a restless rhythm against the windows of Brood Awakening, a tucked-away coffee shop nestled in Chicago's bustling heart. Inside, the air hummed with the clatter of keyboards and the soft murmurs of retirees bent over chessboards. At a corner table, a fortress of spelling tests and red pens surrounded a young woman, her presence a quiet force. Her dark skin glowed under the cafe's warm lights, her tight curls pulled back to reveal sharp cheekbones and eyes that sparkled with purpose. At 28, she was an elementary school teacher at Lincoln Elementary, her days filled with the magic of third graders conquering fractions or sounding out their first chapter books. Each small victory, a child's face lighting up, a shy reader finding her voice, was her treasure, worth more than any paycheck. She graded papers with a steady hand, her coral-painted nails catching the light as she sipped a steaming latte, her sanctuary amidst lesson plans and parent emails. Teaching was her calling, a fire that no modest salary could dim. She barely noticed the cafe's eclectic crowd, hipsters lost in laptops, baristas weaving through tables, until a laugh broke through the ambient chatter. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, unguarded burst, warm and infectious, like sunlight piercing the gray afternoon. Her pen paused mid-mark, hovering over a creative misspelling of catastrophe. She glanced up, her gaze landing on a man at the next table, early 30s, his hazel eyes crinkling as he shook his head at his phone. His navy suit, tailored to perfection, screamed wealth, but his grin was pure, unpretentious joy. He caught her staring and flashed an apologetic smile. "Sorry," he said, his voice smooth as the espresso on her table. "My friend just sent me the cheesiest dad joke in history. Why did the scarecrow become a motivational speaker? Because he was outstanding in his field." Her lips twitched, a laugh bubbling up despite herself. "That's awful," she replied, setting down her pen. "Your friend needs better material." His eyes lit up and he leaned forward, resting his phone on the table. "I'm Ethan," he introduced himself, extending a hand, his cufflinks glinting under the pendant lights. "And you are?" She shook his hand, her palm warm against his. "Just a teacher trying to survive spelling tests," she said, her smile teasing but genuine. Something in the way he held her gaze made her pulse skip, a spark igniting in the ordinary. They fell into conversation as if time had paused just for them. Ethan was an investment banker at a glossy downtown firm, but he carried none of the arrogance she'd expected from his world. He asked about her students, genuinely curious, laughing as she recounted the time a boy named Jamal insisted photosynthesis was a new dance move. "Third graders are wild," she said, her hands animating the story. "Last week I broke up a pencil sword fight during math. I'm half teacher, half referee." Ethan threw his head back, his laugh filling the space between them, and she felt a warmth she hadn't known she craved. He shared his own stories, late nights, crunching numbers, clients with egos bigger than their portfolios, but always circled back to her, his questions thoughtful, his attention unwavering. "What's it like, seeing a kid get it for the first time?" he asked, leaning closer, his suit jacket brushing the table's edge. She told him about a shy girl named Maria who beamed brighter than the sun when she read her first full sentence. His eyes softened, and for a moment she felt seen in a way that went beyond the surface. The hours melted away. Her latte grew cold, her papers untouched, but she didn't care. Ethan was different, not the slick finance bro she'd braced for, but a man who listened, who laughed at her quirks, who made her small world feel vast. He teased her about her red pen, calling it her wand of justice, and she shot back, challenging him to grade a spelling test. "I'd give them all A's for effort," he grinned, dodging her playful swat. As the barista announced closing, they swapped numbers, his promise to bring coffee to her next lunch break lingering in the air. "You'll need it with those pencil-wielding warriors," he winked. Over the next 6 months, their connection deepened. Ethan became a fixture in her life, showing up after school with her favorite hazelnut latte, his tie loosened, his smile bright. He'd sit in her classroom, rolling up his expensive sleeves to tape up crayon-drawn masterpieces like they belonged in a gallery. On weekends, they wandered Grant Park, their fingers brushing as they debated pizza versus tacos, his laughter echoing through the trees. She felt herself falling hard, her heart convinced this was fate, a love born in a coffee shop, nurtured in her classroom, and destined to grow. Yet, in fleeting moments, she noticed glances from passers-by, a barista's raised brow, a customer's lingering stare, subtle reminders that her blackness stood out in spaces where Ethan moved with ease. For now, though, she pushed the unease aside, clinging to the belief that love could bridge any divide. The laughter of the coffee shop still lingered in Amara's mind as she adjusted the strap of her dress and stepped out of Ethan's car. Now, before her, rose the Carter Mansion, a vast estate in the affluent suburbs of Chicago. The grand facade glowed under soft evening lights, columns stretching skyward as if to remind all who entered that this was a world built on legacy and wealth. Amara smoothed the fabric of her navy dress, her palms damp despite the cool air. She whispered to herself to stay calm, to remember the children in her classroom who believed she could solve anything. Tonight, however, felt different. Tonight, she was stepping onto foreign ground. Inside, the scent of lavender polish and old oak filled the air. A crystal chandelier spilled fractured light across marble floors, while oil paintings of stern ancestors peered down from the walls. The mansion seemed to breathe history, but not the kind that welcomed outsiders. Amara walked beside Ethan, her heels clicking against stone, every sound amplified in the cavernous hall. She clasped the pie dish she had baked earlier, her father's pecan recipe wrapped carefully in foil. It was meant as a gesture of goodwill, something from her heart to bridge the gap. Penelope Carter was waiting. The woman stood at the end of the hall, poised like a queen in an emerald dress that shimmered under the chandelier. Her silver hair was pulled into a sleek knot, every strand in place. Her pale blue eyes fixed on Amara with a scrutiny that felt colder than the marble underfoot. The smile she offered was razor-thin. "So," Penelope said. Her tone clipped, the words stretched just long enough to sting. "You're the teacher." Amara extended her hand, steady despite the chill that swept over her. "Amara Johnson," she said warmly. Penelope's handshake was brief, her fingers cool, her expression unreadable. Richard Carter followed a moment later, carrying the aura of a man who had built fortunes with steady deals. His graying hair framed a kindly smile that softened the room. "Welcome, Amara," he said with genuine warmth, though his eyes flicked toward Penelope as if seeking permission to be kind. The dining room was staged like a magazine spread. Polished mahogany table, china gleaming under candlelight, silver cutlery aligned with surgical precision. A rack of roasted lamb filled the air with an aroma that might have felt comforting in any other setting. Amara placed her pie on the sideboard, feeling for a moment like a guest who had brought paper flowers to a gallery of fine art. Dinner began with pleasantries, but Penelope wasted no time sharpening her questions into blades. Teaching must be meaningful, she remarked, slicing through her lamb with unnerving precision. Even if the compensation is modest. The words hung in the air like smoke. Amara lifted her glass of water, masking the heat rising in her chest. It's about the students, she said evenly. Their victories are worth more than any paycheck. Richard nodded appreciatively. My own teacher changed my life, he said. But his voice soon trailed off as Penelope's gaze tightened the room once more. And where exactly did you grow up, Amara? Penelope asked, her tone polished, yet heavy with implication. Southside, was it? That must have been challenging. Amara's smile didn't falter, though inside she bristled at the assumption. It shaped me, she replied. It gave me the resilience I carry into my classroom every day. Penelope's lips curved into what might have passed for approval. Admirable, she said softly, though the word dripped with condescension, a pat on the head disguised as praise. Ethan reached under the table, squeezing Amara's hand, his silent attempt at reassurance. Yet he didn't speak, didn't counter his mother's veiled barbs. His silence pressed against Amara as heavily as Penelope's words. The conversation drifted toward Amara's methods of teaching fractions. She explained how she had turned pizza slices into a game, letting her students eat their way through math. Ethan chuckled, proud, but Penelope tilted her head, her smile precise. So simple, she observed, but sometimes simplicity is best, I suppose. Amara swallowed, her mind a storm beneath the calm of her expression. She wondered if Penelope truly meant simple, or if it was her way of saying unrefined, inadequate. The chandelier above seemed suddenly too bright, the air too heavy with scrutiny. Dessert came, and Amara presented her pecan pie. It's my father's recipe, she said, her voice bright with hope. Penelope accepted the plate, cut a delicate slice, and tasted. Her face revealed nothing. Homemade, she said at last. How thoughtful. She placed the fork down, untouched beyond that single bite. The dismissal was quiet, almost invisible, yet it carved into Amara's chest. She pressed on, asking Penelope about her years as a lawyer, hoping to find common ground. Penelope answered with stories of courtroom triumphs, each tale polished, each victory laced with a subtle boast. She was a woman used to winning, and this dinner was no different. It was a contest of unspoken power. Amara felt the walls closing in. She thought of the children who adored her, who saw her as more than enough, who looked at her with trust and joy. Here, she was an outsider, tolerated but never embraced. She glanced at Ethan, his boyish grin faltering, his eyes darting between her and his mother. He seemed blind to the undercurrents, unaware that each compliment carried a hidden blade. Perhaps he had grown so used to them that he no longer heard the sting. For Amara, each word was fresh, each cut undeniable. As the evening ended, Richard rose, thanking her kindly for coming. Penelope offered another thin smile, her eyes cool as glass. "Do come again," she said, though her tone made the words sound less like an invitation and more like a verdict. Back in the car, Ethan reached for Amara's hand. "See? That wasn't so bad," he said lightly. His optimism was almost childlike, but Amara's throat tightened. She forced a smile, but inside, the truth was clear. Tonight had not been about lamb or pie or polite conversation. It had been a test, one she had never agreed to take. As the city lights came into view, she stared out the window, the reflection of herself superimposed on the glittering skyline. She felt both present and invisible, seen yet not recognized for who she truly was. Ethan squeezed her hand again, but the silence between them said more than words ever could. She thought of the children waiting for her tomorrow, their laughter and endless questions, their belief in her strength. That world was hers, a place where she belonged. Here, in the shadow of the Carter mansion, she had glimpsed another truth. Love might not be enough to bridge the walls that prejudice had built. The glow of the city lights still lingered in Amara's mind as she stared out the car window that night, her reflection flickering across the glass. The silence between her and Ethan had been heavy, filled with words left unsaid. Yet only a few weeks later, that silence was replaced with something entirely different, an image so bright and beautiful it nearly blinded her to everything else. Spring had come to Chicago, painting Grant Park in a tapestry of cherry blossoms and soft grass glistening with dew. The air was alive with petals swirling like confetti, a quiet celebration orchestrated by nature itself. Beneath one sprawling tree, Ethan turned to her, his hazel eyes shimmering with a rare vulnerability. Before Amara could process the sudden stillness in his gaze, he sank to one knee. From his pocket, he produced a velvet box. Inside, a diamond ring caught the fading sunlight, scattering tiny stars across his hands. "Amara Johnson," Ethan said, his voice low but unwavering. "You make my world brighter than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught. A rush of disbelief and joy surged through her. She felt tears sting her eyes as laughter spilled from her lips. She nodded, whispering yes through trembling fingers that covered her mouth. Ethan slid the ring onto her hand, and for that moment the world hushed, leaving only the rhythm of their hearts and the swirl of blossoms around them. He rose, pulling her into an embrace that felt like safety, like home. The applause of strangers passing through the park echoed faintly in the distance, but Amara barely noticed. All she could feel was the warmth of his arms, the press of his lips against her forehead, the promise of a future she dared to believe was possible. That evening, still glowing from the magic of the proposal, Amara followed Ethan into the familiar marble foyer of the Carter mansion. She had imagined sharing their news over a toast, maybe even seeing Penelope's icy smile soften just slightly. She hoped, perhaps foolishly, that love might disarm even the sharpest edges. Instead, the moment the chandelier light caught the ring on her finger, Penelope's eyes narrowed. Her lips curved into what passed as a smile, though it carried the edge of frost. "Well," she said crisply, her gaze locked on Amara's hand. "I suppose we'll need to discuss a prenuptial agreement." The words landed like a stone. Ethan's grin faltered. "Mum, can we at least celebrate first?" His tone carried a plea, but Penelope's focus never wavered. Later that night, the phone rang in Amara's apartment. Penelope's voice, smooth as silk but sharp as steel, filled her ear. "Dear, this isn't personal. Ethan has worked tirelessly to build his future. With your circumstances, we must be cautious." Amara stared at the wall as Penelope's words sank in. Circumstances? The word was a dagger cloaked in politeness. Her race, her upbringing, her modest salary, summed up and dismissed in a single phrase. The following day, a courier delivered an envelope heavier than its weight should allow. Inside was the contract, its pages dense with clauses that drained the color from her face. She spread them across her small kitchen table, her father's pie tin still resting on the counter, remnants of a life too ordinary for the gilded term staring back at her. The agreement was merciless. In the event of divorce, she would receive a token sum for only 2 years. She would have no claim to Ethan's assets, regardless of how long they were married. And the cruelest clause of all, if she brought embarrassment or scandal to the Carter family name, she would leave with nothing. Her fingers tightened around the pen she had picked up instinctively. Each line branded her as a suspect, as if her love for Ethan was not love at all, but a transaction waiting to collapse under scrutiny. When Ethan arrived that evening, his tie loosened and eyes apologetic, he tried to soothe her. "It's just a formality, babe," he whispered, sliding into the chair beside her. "It doesn't change what we have." But his voice lacked conviction, and his glance toward the contract betrayed unease. He didn't look at her when he said it, only at the ring glinting faintly on her hand. "Why does it have to be this way?" Amara asked quietly, her throat thick with unshed tears. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face, avoiding her gaze. "You know my mum. She's protective. It's not about you." But of course it was about her. Every clause on the page screamed it. Every stipulation marked her as less than, as unworthy of trust. The following afternoon, she found herself in a lawyer's office that smelled faintly of leather and dust. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, a view that felt more like a taunt than a gift. Penelope sat across from her, flawless in another tailored dress, her smile a polished mask of civility. The attorney droned through each clause in a voice like parchment crumbling. Amara's eyes blurred over the words, yet the meaning pierced her clearly enough. No assets. Minimal alimony. Silence demanded in the face of insult, and always, the threat of losing everything should she misstep. Ethan sat beside her, silent, his hand hovering but never quite reaching hers. Penelope leaned back, her voice honeyed. "This is best for everyone, dear. It protects Ethan. Surely you understand." Amara wanted to scream, to tell her that love was not something to be litigated, that devotion was not a liability, but the weight of the room pressed down, and Ethan's silence pressed harder still. Her hand shook as she lifted the pen. Tears welled, spilling onto the paper, tiny blots staining the neat print. Each stroke of her name felt like surrender, a confirmation of their lowest suspicions. Across the table, Penelope's lips curved into a victorious smile. The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with finality. Ethan leaned closer, whispering, "It's over now," as if the signing were an end rather than the beginning of a deeper fracture. Amara slid the pen back across the polished desk, her chest tight, her heart a storm. She had signed for love, but in doing so, she felt smaller, diminished, as though the world she had fought to build for herself could be erased by ink and paper. As they left the office, the city skyline glimmered through the glass, indifferent to the battle she had lost. She clung to Ethan's arm, forcing herself to believe in the warmth of his presence, even as a quiet voice inside whispered that something essential had already broken. As they left the lawyer's office, the city skyline shimmered through the glass like a mirage, distant and cold. Amara clung to Ethan's arm, forcing herself to believe in the warmth of his presence, even as a quiet voice inside whispered that something essential had already broken. That whisper grew louder days later, when another blow struck, one that would unravel the very foundations of the life she thought she knew. The hospital room was heavy with antiseptic air and the beeping of monitors that measured time in fragile heartbeats. Amara sat beside her father's bed, her hands wrapped around his weathered fingers. James Johnson had been her anchor since childhood, the steady presence who had carried her through every storm. Now at 61, his body seemed impossibly small beneath the thin hospital blanket, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. "Daddy," she whispered, adjusting the scarf tucked under his neck. "I'm here. You don't have to fight alone." His eyes fluttered open, the familiar warmth still there despite the haze of pain. He smiled faintly, his voice a rasp. "Baby girl." He paused, gathering strength. "When it's time, you go to First National. Safety deposit box. Everything's there." Her throat tightened. "Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine." But he only squeezed her hand, his calloused palm trembling against hers. "Promise me," he murmured. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, unable to form the words. Hours later, the monitor flatlined, and the world seemed to shatter. Amara clung to his lifeless hand, sobs racking her body as nurses moved gently around her, their voices hushed but unyielding. She had lost her father, her compass, the one person who had always seen her clearly. The funeral came quickly, held in a modest church on the south side where James had raised her. wooden pews filled with neighbors, teachers, and a few colleagues from his supposed office job. Faces she barely recognized spoke kindly of him. Dependable, humble, devoted to his daughter. Amara stood at the pulpit, her voice breaking as she spoke of his sacrifices. "He taught me to never let anyone make me feel small," she said, the words cracking through her grief like a vow. A week later, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Miss Johnson, this is Mr. Grayson. I was your father's attorney for many years. We need to meet about his estate." Amara almost laughed at the absurdity. An estate? Her father had driven an aging Toyota, lived in a rented apartment, and wore the same brown jacket every winter. The only inheritance she expected was the legacy of his love. Still, curiosity and the memory of his final words drew her to Mr. Grayson's office. The building was plain, its carpets worn, its shelves cluttered with files stacked like towers. Grayson, a wiry man with kind eyes, handed her a brass key. "Your father was clear. You're to open the box alone. Read everything, then we'll talk." Her hands trembled as she walked into the cavernous vault of First National Bank. The clerk led her down a narrow aisle lined with steel doors. She slid the key into one, and with a heavy groan, the metal drawer pulled open. Inside were folders, photographs, and envelopes neatly organized, as if her father had been preparing for this moment all his life. The first item she pulled out was a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Tech entrepreneur James Johnson sells secure tech solutions for $2.8 billion." Her breath hitched. The photo showed a younger version of her father, shaking hands with suited executives, his smile proud yet humble. Amara stumbled back into the chair provided, her knees too weak to hold her. She read the headline again, her mind spinning. Her father, the man who packed her lunches, who never missed a school play, who lived paycheck to paycheck, had been a billionaire. She rifled through the folders, each document deepening the revelation. Stock certificates, bank statements with numbers so large they seemed surreal. Photographs of James at charity galas, standing beside figures she had only seen in magazines. Letters from scholarship recipients thanking him for the opportunities that had changed their lives. Finally, she found a letter written in his familiar scrawl. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "Baby girl," it began. "I wanted you to grow up knowing your worth comes from your heart, not your wallet. I built a fortune, but I chose a simple life for us. I didn't want you to carry the burden of wealth before you knew your own strength. Now you're ready. Use this wisely. Build, give, and never forget where you come from. You are more than any number on a page." The tears came hard then, blurring the ink until the words bled into one another. She clutched the letter to her chest, her sobs echoing against the cold steel walls. Her father hadn't hidden the truth to deceive her. He had done it to protect her, to give her freedom from the weight of expectations. She thought of Penelope Carter's icy smile, the contract branding her unworthy, the word circumstances used as a weapon. The irony cut deep. They had seen her as a liability, a threat to be contained. Yet here she sat, heir to a fortune larger than the Carters' entire dynasty. When she finally emerged from the vault, the daylight seemed too bright, too sharp. As she walked through the marble lobby, she caught the eyes of a security guard lingering on her. His expression was skeptical, as if she didn't belong in a place like this, as if the documents in her bag couldn't possibly be hers. She straightened her back, slipping the letter into her purse. For the first time in weeks, her steps felt steady, her chin lifted. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Your worth comes from your heart." Later that week, Amara found herself once again at the Carter mansion. The dining room gleamed as always, the chandelier scattering prisms across polished wood. Penelope's voice carried its usual edge of condescension. "It must be nice to have a little savings of your own," she said, her smile taut. Amara reached into her bag. Her hand did not shake as she laid a folder of documents across the table. The figures were unmistakable. Assets, investments, properties amounting to billions. The room froze. Richard's fork clattered against his plate. Ethan's mouth fell open, words caught in his throat. And Penelope's face drained of color as she stared down at the numbers, her composure cracking for the first time. Amara met their eyes calmly, her voice steady as steel. My father was James Johnson, founder of SecureTech. Perhaps you've heard of him. Thank you for staying with Amara's journey. A story of love, prejudice, loss, and the unexpected discovery of strength. At its heart, it reminds us that self-worth is not measured by wealth, family approval, or society's gaze, but by the courage to stand tall in the face of doubt. Amara's struggle mirrors challenges many face in different forms. Being underestimated, judged by circumstance, or forced to prove their value. Yet her triumph shows that dignity and resilience can rewrite the narrative. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand firm for your own worth, even when others doubted you? Share your reflections. Your stories might inspire someone else walking a similar path. Thank you again for listening and for being part of this community. Until next time, stay true to your own strength and never forget your value.